Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Alexis Batulis with Columbus US, and today we have a special presentation for you on Management Reporter Tips and Tricks in Dynamics GP. We started the call by placing everyone on mute, so if you have any questions during today's presentation, please use the question box on the upper right-hand side of the screen to enter any questions that may come up. At the end, we'll have time for Q&A with our presenter. Finally, we are recording this session and we'll be sending a link to all attendees within an hour after this live webcast. Now I'm excited to introduce your presenter today, Senior GP Implementation Consultant, Annette Brown. So without further ado, Annette, I'll hand it over to you to get us started.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. I have lots of tips for you today, and hopefully I've explained them enough. But if not, please feel free to ask questions for further clarification. There's the question or chat box up in the corner. And if you have any questions that maybe are more specific to your organization and you don't want to discuss those in this setting, I'd be happy to schedule one-on-one with you to discuss. Just let us know. There'll be some contact information at the end during our Q&A session. So without further ado, I guess we'll get started here. Half the battle in any software is just knowing that something's possible or not. I'm going to point out the limitations so we can discuss the right tool for your job, which may not be Management Reporter. That might sound a little funny coming from a webinar on tips and tricks for Management Reporter, but just as a concept applies to Power Tools, it applies to reporting tools as well. MR is great for creating financial statements, and it's a great end user tool that was designed with the accountant in mind. You don't have to know which tables to query or how to link tables together to pull data into a report. On the flip side, that limits you to only being able to pull information from the general ledger. You cannot create reports where the information resides in other modules or even other data sources. That's where being able to use other reporting tools can help fill the gaps in reporting and analysis. For example, using SSRS reports or Power BI to create dashboards and visual reports that allow you to drill into the data to do further analysis of pieces of data. Power BI can be simple and fast, capable of creating quick insights from an Excel workbook and or a GP data source. Some of the tips we'll be covering today are just quick how-tos, and some we'll discuss in a little bit more detail. I've broken it down into 10 topics. 1 + 1 = 2, meaning formulas. Cool columns, things you can do to make your columns work more efficiently, or maybe things you didn't know you could do. Radical rows, tips to swap out ledgers or time frames and make things undrillable. Keeping it clean, so some formatting tips. World Wide Web Viewer how-tos. Sometimes those things aren't quite as obvious as they appear. Make it mine, so tips on customizing it. Head to toe, headers and footer options. Need for speed, shortcut tips. Hodgepodge, random tips I thought were cool. And then some glamour shots. How do you make your reports look cool? So first, we'll talk about formulas and some different ways to make report calculations calculate correctly without having to manually manipulate values after the report runs. So our first 4 tips will deal with formulas. I'm going to combine tips 2 and 3, and they'll be shown in one example. We'll talk about using percent calculations with the CBR format code. We'll discuss how to use @unit in if-then statements in conjunction with reviewing how to do non-printing columns. And then we'll show you how to create averages using the function periods in formulas. First tip is about percent of sales columns or a percent of total expense columns. So firstly, I suppose I should explain what is CBR. CBR stands for change base row for percent allocation. Essentially, you're establishing a denominator for a ratio calculation. To do this, you need to set up in two places, the row definition and the column definition. Using a format code in the row definition, you're setting which row will represent the denominator in your calculation. In this example, we're using row 250, the net sales, as our denominator. By adding additional CBR rows, you can change which row becomes the denominator. So you can have the sales row be divided by the total sales, but then the total operating expenses can be divided by the total expense number. To create the percent column, you'll need to set up a calc column in the column definition. The formula uses the syntax of base row for the denominator, where base row was defined back over in the row definition when you set the CBR code in the row definition. You can see here the formulas B divided by base row or D divided by base row. The numerator is the column letter you want to use to create the ratio. In this case, we are using B and D, which represent our month of and year-to-date info. This consolidated income statement showing minority interest has a lot going on, which makes it a good example to showcase lots of tips. All these tips can be used in various ways. I wanted to use this report as an example of how to use them so you can think about your reports and how you might use some of these tips in your own organization. We're going to look at how to use if-then statements in conjunction with the @unit code to calculate the minority interest. We'll also look at how to use non-printing rows to pull in eliminations from all three companies and show them in a single total amount. How to use tree definitions to make a company side-by-side report, and how to use dimension filters in column definitions to limit which accounts get pulled into that column. As you can see, we have three individual company columns, a total, an elimination column, and a consolidated total here at the end. You'll notice we have minority interest only showing in the total columns. I'm going to show you how to make that happen. First, we start with a row definition used to create the income statement. We need to create a row that calculates the minority interest. To do that, we use a calc format code. Our calculation will use an if-then statement that incorporates the @unit function. This allows us to control which company the calculation is performed for. The summary USMF portion of the calculation is one of the company branches from the consolidation tree and basically is saying only perform this calculation on the USMF branch. All other companies make the value 0. We use the column letter from the column definition to control which numbers from the report will get used in the calculation. Last, we use column H, the column restriction attribute, to restrict which columns to place the answer. Here in the column definition, we're using non-printing columns and column calculations in conjunction with reporting units and dimension filters. To make a side-by-side company report, you must use a consolidation tree and then restrict the column to one of the branches of the tree using the report unit cell. In column B, you'll notice is the first company column, which also happens to be the company with the minority interest. Columns F, G, and H are our elimination columns. You'll notice they have also been restricted using the reporting unit and have been set up with a non-print control, an NP print control. This is so we can pull in the elimination information for each company, but we don't want to actually see these columns print. You'll notice we also have a dimension filter established to limit the column to just certain accounts. In this slide, you can see we have restricted the column to use the USMF branch of the consolidation tree. Each of the other company columns are restricted to the other company branches of the consolidation tree. We have 3 elimination columns identified to restrict the column further, or the 3 accounts in this column, but we also have 3 columns. And each column can have distinct account setup. They don't all have to be exactly the same. Column I is our calculation column that adds column F, G, and H. Column J is our consolidation total that subtracts the elimination amount in column I from our total in column E. Here you can see column E and column J are the columns we would like our minority interest amounts to appear. Coming back to our row definition, you can see in column H, which is the column restriction attribute, we're restricting the minority interest calculation to only appear in columns E and columns J of the column definition. So this is another look at our final report where you can see the minority interest shows only in the total and the consolidated total columns. And we have 3 columns for the company, and then our eliminations are only showing in the 1 column. The periods function allows you to use a dynamic parameter in your calculations. The parameter value is filled in by using the base code in the period cell of the calc column. This gets populated by the report date run at generation. This base code in the period cell works the same way it does in a typical FD column. By using the periods function in a formula, you can dynamically change the value at report generation based on the report date. So if you run this in March, the denominator would be 3. But if you run this in October, it would be 10. In this case, we're using it to create an average. But really, the periods function can be used in all kinds of calculations. I've used it in if-then statements and multiplication formulas. That might need to be its own webinar. Columns and calculations. Oh, the things you can do. That's giving me ideas. Hey, make a comment if you'd like to see interest in an advanced column webinar. All right, back to the report. So if you run a report for March, the base period becomes 3, which would make the denominator in this formula 3. Columns give you the ability to lay out the reports to analyze lots of different time frames or show different details and comparisons. We'll look at ways to do that. Creating rolling 12 months in a single column. Using numbers in the start and end date cells to create weekly reports. And then how to add account numbers or row codes into our reports and why that might be helpful. Here we're creating a dynamic formula to calculate a rolling 12 months in a single column in the period cell of the column definition. Remember, base is populated from the report date at generation. By using base minus 11 colon base, we can create a rolling 12-month column. If you run this report for October, your base becomes 10. To fill in the formula you see there, we have 10 minus 11 colon 10, which equals -1 colon 10. It's going to cross over your fiscal year and pull November and December from the previous year to include with January through October of the current year, which gives you 12 months worth of data. Next, we'll talk about start and end dates to create reports where columns are restricted to pull only transactions from a certain time frame. In this example, we have a weekly report. Each column represents a different week or a day of the week or week of the month, actually. We're using days of the month rather than actual days to restrict the columns. This makes the column dynamic so that it can be used with each month. Having extra information about the account in your report can be very helpful. By adding the account column in the column definition, you can make the account number show up in the final report. You can provide users with additional dimension information in account column as well. Users choose how they want to view the accounts with or without dimension descriptions. Turn these descriptions on and off with the View Dimension Descriptions option, and then you'll actually be able to see which dimension that account came from. You can also provide users with additional row code information from the row definition by using a row column type. The row code shown here will display in the final report. This can be very handy when trying to figure out where numbers are coming from when troubleshooting formulas. While columns control what goes across the page, rows control what goes down the page. So let's talk about how to make the rows work for us and give us the information we want and allow us to hide information from users that shouldn't see details. We're going to do that by talking about column restriction attributes to control column values print for a particular row, using a format code to make a row undrillable, options for using other dimensions to code a report, and then how to use the row modifiers to make different ledgers or timeframes display in a row instead of a column. First is restricting which column a value print, which column the value actually prints in. This might look familiar. We just talked about the column restriction in our minority interest example. Here's another example of how to put that to use. In this income statement, we have subtotals print in different column. It's actually just a quick two-step setup. First, you create an additional FD column in your column definition. Here you can just copy and paste column B to column C, and then delete the header in column C. Next, in your row definition, we're going to update column H. This is the column restriction attribute of a row. Using this attribute, we can hide values and only display values in certain columns. In the minority interest example, we only filled in column H for one row. In this example, we fill it in for all the rows. Using the column letters from the column definition, we can add either B or C. And in our example, column B would represent account balances and column C would print the subtotals. For a look like this. Sometimes in reports, you want to provide users with account or transaction level information. However, there may be a value on a report that you want to suppress the drill down feature. By using the XD or XT print control attribute, you make a row undrillable. XD will disable the account detail and XT will disable the transaction detail report. By selecting the row that you want to suppress and double-clicking in the column G to open the print control options, select XD option, which says suppress row and account detail report, or select XT to suppress transaction detail report, and then press OK. When you generate the report, you won't be able to drill down into the account or transaction level for any row with these codes. The next set of tips has two options that aren't always talked about. using other dimensions to code a row definition instead of GL accounts. One is the account category. This is a required field on the account card in GP. Account categories allow you to group accounts together that may not always be sequential. Ideally, you would want to set up your account categories to mimic the line items on a summarized balance sheet and income statement. These aren't really used in GP for a whole lot, so many times customers don't really pay attention to setting these up with much accuracy, but if used correctly, they can really be helpful in report design, especially with BI reports. It's worth noting that account categories are customizable in GP, and there are ways to mass update the account card settings without having to open every account manually. So talk to your consultant for options if you're interested in using account categories in your reporting. These would get used in the FD financial dimensions column, and they're great for coding reports because it will minimize the maintenance needed to your reports when new accounts are added to the chart of accounts. Being that it's a required field on a new account in GP means that if the account category is used in the report, they will be automatically included in the report as well. Now we'll look at dimension value sets. These are like account categories, but they are defined and maintained within Management Reporter. Where the account categories are set up in GP, they are also set up on each dimension independently, where account category in GP are set up based on the full account code. So with a dimension value, you can create a group of departments or locations or whatever your segments are in your chart. A dimension value set can contain values in a single dimension only. So basically in GP language, that means segments in your chart of account. With dimension value sets, you can achieve a higher degree of flexibility in grouping combination of accounts together if used in conjunction with other dimension value sets created for the other dimensions. Like account categories, they're great for when account groupings are not sequential or doing a lot of cherry picking to include the correct values. Once set up, they can be used in multiple row definitions, column definitions, and tree definitions. If the dimension value set is modified, the update applies to all areas that use the dimension value set. One downside is that the additions to the chart of accounts may not be included automatically in your dimension value set if the dimension value set did not include a range of values and you did more cherry picking. So if you'd like to know more about dimension value sets, please reach out to me and I would be happy to discuss. Okay, the last one in this group are row modifiers. These allow you to expand your reporting capabilities with additional formatting and presentation options. While most financial statements are organized with information appearing in distinct columns, such as actual, budget, current period, year to date, you may have specific reporting requirements for information to appear in rows instead, such as a row of actuals followed by a row of budget information. You can achieve this using row modifiers in the row definition. In the row definition, there is a separate column I for row modifier where you can specify a different book code or period for a single row. To apply a row modifier to a row, simply double click in the column for the row you want to change. This opens the row modifier window where you can choose to apply the account, book code, or attribute modifier to the selected row in your row definition. Use a book code modifier to display budget values instead of actuals on the report. This will override what is specified in the column format for this row. Use the account modifier to override the column layout and display year-to-date, current period, or beginning balances for this row. Account modifiers can be used to offset the base period if, for example, you want to display a number of periods before or after the base period for the report. Again, when using this attribute, it will override what is specified in the column format for this row. I've used this for clients that want to have a 24 rolling monthly trend report where they want both the balance sheet and the income statement in the same report. So if you think about it, in a balance sheet, you'd want to see the year-to-date values, where in an income statement, you usually want to see the monthly change. By using the account modifier, you can make half the report display one way while the other half of the rows display differently. In addition, you can use an attribute filter to restrict results in the row based on values for any of the available attributes. You'll notice that these are the attributes of a journal entry. So if you fill these in, it's going to fill this in. It's going to restrict it based on attributes that come from a specific journal. With these next set of tips, we're going to make the report work for us by formatting the report dynamically based on things that happen in the report. Things like hiding description lines, changing the format when you drill back to the account and transaction detail, and only showing relevant data through conditional printing or only rows with data. The use of DES codes and the related rows field in the row definition can be very helpful to hide description lines and underscores when there's no supporting data. Here you can see we have filled in column C with the format code DES and column D, the related formulas, rows, and units with the row code we want to relate this blank line to. We don't want the blank line to show on row 110 if the values on row 80 are 0 and therefore don't show. So if we set up this report to only show rows with amounts and sales, cost of goods sold, and gross margin are 0 and therefore suppressed, then the corresponding blank lines won't show either, leaving us a clean looking report and not one with a page of bunch of blank lines where amounts were not shown. This type of setup can be very helpful when creating departmental reports where some departments don't have all the same revenue and expenses. When we drill down to the account and transaction detail reports, you have some options to control how they look and whether they display or not. To get those options, click the Settings tab on the report definition, then click on the Other button. Click on the Account and Transaction Detail tab, and here we can see the options for the account details, like whether to include the accounts and descriptions or sorting by natural or main segment when the main account isn't the first segment. And then you also have transaction detail options like subtotal by period. I've seen many times where the display account code option has been deselected on a report, and then when the end user drill down into that level, they don't see the account code. So this is a good place to go check to make sure that that's actually selected. Or when they're drilling down to a set of accounts and the main account isn't the first segment in the chart of accounts, so it's sorted based on department or location rather than your main account. This column definition is using conditional printing to dynamically choose which columns display based on the report date at generation. There's lots of different ways to make conditional printing work in reports. In this example, we have a 12-month trend, and we would only like the monthly columns to print that are less than or equal to the report period generated. By using the print control option on the FD columns of period is less than or equal to base, or B less than equal B, we can have the system determine when to include and when to exclude the column. As you can see, there are many different options here to fit the requirements of various different reports. The P in the print control formula is defined in the period attribute here. B represents the report period chosen when generating the report. Each column will be evaluated independently and only those that meet the criteria will actually print. I get asked how to do this all the time, so this is a must-have tip. In the previous DES tip, we discussed suppressing rows with no amounts and how to relate rows to other columns so they don't show either. In this example, I will show you where in the report definition to define your choice to suppress rows with no amount. On the Settings tab of the report definition, under the Other Formatting section, make sure the Displays Rows with No Amounts is not checked. The next 4 tips will revolve around the World Wide Web Viewer. You just need to have an internet browser to use the web viewer. We're going to talk about how to display your reports side by side, how to use the go-to function, how to show summary lines of a report, and then how to download all the reports to a single workbook. A cool function of the web viewer is the ability to view your reports side by side. When a report generates, it opens as a separate tab in the web viewer. Just grab the tab and pull it out of the stacked view of the window, or right-click on when you're opening a new version and select it in a new window. Then you can use the Windows Snap feature to snap the tabs to each side of your screen. All you have to do is click the Windows button on your keyboard plus the left or right arrow to engage the Windows Snap feature. You can do this with any window. It doesn't have to just be websites. It could be different applications that you have on your workstation as well. So using that Windows Snap feature is very, very helpful. Use Go-To menu to jump to key lines of your report. So when you generate a report, quick links are dynamically generated based on descriptions and calculated rows in the report. They allow you to easily jump to specific sections of the report. To access the quick links, click on the Go-To button in the bottom right-hand corner. Use the Show menu to view reports on as a summary line only. So if you're looking at this report, it'll again look at your descriptions and your calculated lines, and it will only show those lines in your report. Report groups, when generated, create a landing page with links to all the individual reports that were included in the report group, which is what you see here. Rather than opening each report independently and downloading it to Excel, which would result in giving you multiple Excel workbooks, you can download your reports to Microsoft Excel right from this screen. When you choose to download the reports to Excel from this page, you will save all the reports as a single Excel workbook. That file will contain one tab for each report in the report group. The detail level chosen, financial account or transaction, when you generated the report group will determine if there's an F, A, or T tab included in the download. So if you ran the report with just a financial level, all the reports would include just the F tab. The download file retains all the formatting from Management Reporter and will also output header images when they're present in the report. Oh, are you guys still with me? Halfway there. 4 ideas that focus on customizing the look or process flow. The use of font styles and how to make them, how to hide stuff, where to set up publish reports to a specific location, and how to use report group overrides. Having a consistent look in all your reports makes for a more professional looking set of financials. You can use the style and formatting option from the format menu to create font styles that can be used when formatting reports. Once created, they can be used just like the format styles that you see in Microsoft Word. You click on the top drop down in the upper right hand corner to access all the formats that have been created. This left portion of the screen is called the navigation pane. If you choose the View Navigation Pane option from the menu bar, you can hide this pane from view, giving you more real estate on your screen to see more of the row. You can alternatively just click on Alt F1 if you want to use the shortcut keys, and that will actually do the same thing. Just remember to put the navigation bar back in place if you want to use the panels to open other building blocks. But I use this function all the time when I'm coding reports. Every time you generate a report, it goes somewhere in the Management Reporter library. By default, it will go to the root directory. You can customize the library and create a folder structure to store your generated reports. When setting up report definitions and report groups, you can choose the folder you would like to publish reports to. In the report definition on the Output and Distribution tab, you can change the folder you want the report to generate to here by clicking on the ellipse button located on this line. If you are running reports with a report group, you have a couple options to determine where the report generates to. First, on the Group Distribution tab, you can choose where you want the landing page to publish to in the library. That's that last page I showed you on the tips when we were doing the downloading. Next, on the Report Distribution tab, you have a few options to where the actual report's published to. If you deselect the Override Report Location option, each report in the report group will be published to the folder selected on the individual report definition. So if you have 5 reports in the report group, they could potentially go to 5 different folders. If you select the override report location, it means you want to ignore the report definition location from the individual reports. Then you can select to either use the report group location to put the reports in the same location as the landing page, which is probably the most popular. Or if you leave that blank, you can choose any single folder to publish all the reports in the report group to. Working with report groups is a great way to gain efficiencies in your month-end report generation process. Not only can you run multiple reports at the same time, as the previous tip explained, you can override the locations to publish reports to the library, saving time and potentially having to update report locations on all the reports when generating individually. Using the report options in the report group allows you to customize the report date and how much you get from each of the reports. You can change the company detail level or the provisional level to get the exact contents and drillable level for your reports. If you choose the override option above and your reports are not using a tree definition, know that every report in this group will now pull from the company selected on this line. In addition, all reports will pull the same detail level and provisional level selected here as well. If you have reports in this group that should pull for different companies and are not using a tree definition in the report definition, or you need different drill down capabilities for each report, you need to either include them in the separate report group or leave the override company, detail, and date setting from the individual report definition blank. Depending on your choice for the above option to override the company, detail, and date setting will determine whether you can actually use this change date option. If you leave the override checked, you'll be able to override the date for all the reports. If you leave it blank, it's going to look at the individual reports to determine the default base period for each report. These next tips focus on ideas for headers and footers within a report. We'll look at how to use the auto text option, additional text fields from the tree definition, how to manage the day of the week in reports, and how to show headers and footers in reports. Auto text in reports is a great way to keep a report updated with the correct information to accurately reflect what is being shown in the report without having to manually update it every time a report is generated. The unit description function is helpful when a tree is added to a report definition. This function pulls the unit description from the tree definition. If the report is displaying one page for each branch, we want the header to accurately reflect which branch of the tree is being represented. This tip is another use of the auto text function for headers and footers. The very last column in a reporting tree definition can hold 10 fields of extra text information. This is a great place to store information you want to display in headers or footers that is related to each branch of a tree. To find these options, you would click Insert Auto Text, the text field from the reporting tree, and choose which text field you want to add. In this example, we place the manager name in text field 1 on each branch of the tree, so each manager's name would appear on the footer for each department they were responsible for. The dreaded day of the week. Everyone asks, how do I get rid of the day of the week in my report date? The answer will depend on which viewer you're actually using, the report viewer or the web viewer. If you're using the report viewer, then you need to change the long date setting on your individual workstation. If you're using the web viewer, you need to change the date setting for the service account running the MR services. The long date setting that changes is the same. It's just a matter of which box and which user that you log into to actually change that date setting. So if you're using the web viewer, you want to log in as the process service user on the workstation that is actually running the MR configuration console. You're going to go to the control panel, and then you're going to click on region. From here, you can click on the drop down of the long date and choose the format you would rather have. The changes in the web viewer won't take effect until the MR Management Reporter services are restarted. Now remember, if you're using the report viewer, you need to do this on your individual workstation as yourself. And everyone that's using that needs to do that since it's a per workstation setting. If you're using the web viewer and you are not seeing your headers, click in the bottom right corner and you can click the show button and headers and footers to see your headers appear. All right, the next 4 tips are related to the need for speed. How to change the default company. What does the F3 key do? We'll talk about using the find and replace option, and then how to renumber your rows when needed. Here I'll show you how to change the company from your status bar. Just like in GP, you can double click on the company name in the status bar to open the companies window and then select the company as default. Sometimes it's easier to keep your hands on the keyboard when navigating and setting up values in cells. The F3 key will open drop downs in cells. So basically anywhere you see a drop down or the ellipse button, you can press the F3 key to open the drop down box. And as an added bonus, this option actually works in all Microsoft applications and usually in websites as well. This next step is the find and replace option. I use this tip a lot for maintenance and troubleshooting. So in rows or columns or trees, you can use edit replace to update values. I use it for things like replacing all the budget IDs in a column definition when the year ends, or maybe just using the find option to determine if a row or a tree of a particular account or department or whatever set up. The ability to renumber your rows in the row definition is also in the edit menu and is equally as handy. Don't worry, all your formulas are changed too, so you don't lose anything when you renumber your rows. Now, 4 tips that we'll call hodgepodge tips because they just really didn't fit in any other category. How to change the description on your building blocks and why that might be helpful. We're going to talk about how to force a currency symbol to print on a row. How to use the autofit in column definitions and why you might not want to. And then one of the most underutilized functions is how to open a previously generated report. Change the description on your building blocks with the report, row, or column definition already open. You would click on the File and then Properties to allow you to change the description on a row, column, or tree, and most importantly on a report definition after a report may have already been created. The report definition description is probably the most helpful because it usually winds up in the header of a report when you use the at REPORT description code, so at report description code. I like to use this code in the header of my reports as the report title. This way, when you make a copy of a report, the report title automatically updates in the header. That is, if you remembered to update the description in the Save As process. If you forget, no worries. Just use the File Properties function so you can change the description after the report has already been saved. If you try and do a File Save As again, and you leave the name the same, the actual name, not the description, it'll tell you it already exists. So the only way to change that description after you've saved the report is to do the file save, or the file properties function when you have the report open. If you need your report to have currency symbols on certain rows, you can use CS in the print column of a report definition to print currency symbols on a specific row. You can use the option AutoFit option to allow Management Reporter to select the appropriate width for the cell content. If you choose, it will actually choose the largest value in the column and auto-fit it to size. You'll never have to worry about seeing the pound signs in your columns because it wasn't large enough to fit your values. Just widening the columns A, B, or C like you do in Excel does not widen the columns on your report. Just be careful when you're using lots of columns in your report. You may end up with many columns of all different sizes depending on the content of each column. So if you want a more unified look, you may want to use a fixed size instead. Once a report has been generated, it is stored in the library. We don't have time to talk about the Management Reporter library. Don't even get me on my soapbox. We have a whole nother webinar that I did that you could check out on our website for more information on that. But in any case, if you hover over the icon just to the left of the Generate button, you'll see when the last time a report was generated. If you click that icon, it will open the previously generated report. You don't need to actually regenerate it. If nothing's changed, just open the last time you generated it. A lot of my clients don't even realize that option is there, and they just continually just regenerate reports, exasperating the problem with the report library when all they really needed to do was open the last time they generated it. All right, people, we're almost there. Last 4 glamour shots. We're going to talk about how to use sort values in a report, indenting things to group lines together, displaying negative numbers in red, and sorting accounts. Here we're going to talk about using the format code on a row definition to automatically sort or asort rows for like variance reporting. So say you want to see a list of expenses sorted from high to low or low to high. You don't want to have to come into the row definition and manually change the order of the accounts listed on the page. But by using the ASORT function format code, we can make the report do the work for us. As you can see in row 130, we use the sort format code in the related formulas, rows, and unit columns. We identify the rows we want sorted. In the column restriction, we identify which column we want to use as the sort values. In row 580, you'll notice we use a different format code to sort in a descending format and choose a different column to sort the values on. You can use the indent icon on the menu just as you would in any other Microsoft software. No need to go into every cell and hit the space bar. I get asked a lot if there's a way to display negative numbers in red. So to get to that setting, you would just click on the Settings tab in the report definition and then make sure that the display negative numbers in red is actually checked. And finally, we made it to the last tip. Woo! Thanks for sticking with me, guys. Sort by natural or main segment. We talked about this in a previous slide, but it's worth mentioning again. By default, when you drill into the account level report, the accounts will sort based on the value in the first segment. If your main account is in another segment, this option allows you to force the sorting to be from the main account as defined on the account format screen in GP. To get to these settings, click on the Settings tab of the report definition, then click the Other button. To get those options, then click on the Account and Transaction Detail tab, and then click the Sort by Natural or Main Segment box, and then click OK. As I mentioned before, we do have other webinars on Management Report on topics such as the library, security, reporting groups that go into more depth than what time allows today. So be sure to check out our website, see any additional information. And with that, I don't know that I left any room for questions, but I am totally here still if you guys want to ask them.
All right. Thank you so much, Annette, for such a great presentation. Now let's see if we have any questions coming in. Once again, you can enter them into the chat. We'll be on for the next 5 minutes or so, so please ask away.
Hey, I'm glad I was able to help, Jennifer. That's awesome. I love when people learn new things because that's kind of the whole point of watching an hour-long presentation, right? I'm hoping people have questions, but maybe I just answered them well enough. I try to include a lot of the things that I get asked a lot about. How do I distribute reports to Mac or non-GP users? Well, it should work for Mac users and non-GP users, but what you have to do is in Management Reporter, they have to be set up as a user. And then you can set them up as viewers. There's no licensing requirements in terms of like having to pay for extra licenses for Management Reporter. So you can set up as many people as you want and you can set them up as a viewer. And then you would just make sure that those viewers have rights to specific folders that you're actually putting those in. And when you send the link to them, it will just open it in a web viewer and they'll be able to open it. They don't have to have any software loaded. They don't have to have but they do have to be set up as a user though. So I do have a couple other webinars that we kind of talk about that in more length, or if you want to actually contact and you need to see things in more detail. But it just because they're on Mac and they're non-GP users doesn't mean it won't work. You just have to set them up as a user in Management Reporter and give them appropriate rights to appropriate folders where you store the reports. Hopefully that answered that question. And I know we had a couple people that had some issues at the beginning where they weren't hearing the audio. So I hope everyone else was able to hear the audio okay. It's one of those quirky things with webinars that you have to actually use your computer audio for some reason. Thank you for all the tips. When you have a report and you drill down on a line item, the first drill down is based on your tree. That is correct. Is there a way to drill down so that the accounts in that line show first instead of the tree line item? Unfortunately, it is going to follow the breakdown on the branch level of how you have your tree defined. And a lot of times I get this question when people are trying to do consolidated reporting between multiple companies and they want to see the total for a specific account for all three companies, let's say, right? So in that case, what I usually suggest is whatever you have in the row is going to be the consolidating level. So if you only have the main account, and let's say you have, let's just for simplicity, let's say you have a main account and you have a department, and you only have the main account in the row definition, then the first drill down is going to break down the main account by the company. However, if you put the full account code, then the financial level that you see is going to be the roll up of all three companies for that full account. I don't know if that helps at all. But if you have further questions, I think my email address was up there at one point. You can go ahead and email me or Alexis, and you know, we can either set up a time to look at some stuff, or you know, you can ask in more detail, or unless you want to put it in here if that didn't answer your question completely, but hopefully they answered a little bit more. You are very welcome. I'm glad I could help. Yeah, like I said, a lot of times when we're doing these kinds of trainings and as I'm doing trainings with clients, I hear the same things over and over again. So I try to include a lot of that kind of stuff in this presentation, but you know, obviously there's always going to be questions that you have that are specific to something that you might want to do. And we're very happy to help in any way we can. I mean, half the battle with any software is knowing what it can do. So you know, hopefully this presented that in such a way that you guys are able to at least glean some ideas of, okay, what's available and ideas of how I can use that in my reports. On the 12-month report, can you show actual for months past versus budget? So I'm assuming you're asking maybe like wanting to be able to do like a forecasted year to date kind of report. So like let's say you ran the report in June and you want to see 6 months of actual and 6 months worth of budget so that you get a forecasted year to date number. That is possible. You can do that. You would use those print controls like I showed in the one where we were doing the trend and you said P is less than or equal to base. So essentially, if you understand that concept, just double it and put all your budget columns in there. So now instead of just having 12 columns, you have 24 columns, and make all the budget columns have the period be greater than the base, not greater than or equal to, just greater than the base. So then what that's going to do is it's going to hide all the columns that for actual that are greater than the base, but for the budget, it's going to only show the ones that are greater and not less. And then make your year-to-date column, so to speak, make that a calculation and have it do essentially, and I know I've done this a bazillion times, so it's essentially probably going to be B:Y. And only the columns that display will actually be included in that forecasted year-to-date number. Now, there's a couple different tricks for actually being able to get the header correct so that you can, you know, have it span across actual and budget so you know which columns are represented in each, or you could just go in and just type in actual over the 12 columns and budget over the 12 columns. That gets a little messy because then there's a lot of extra detail, but there is a way to span it by using the across with column, or I think I can't remember exactly what it's called. But if you want to know how to do that one, send me an email, Adam, and I can send you the code that you need to put in there. It's to make it spread correctly. I love questions. Keep them coming, people. We got all kinds of time. If anybody wants to stay on and ask questions, I'm happy to answer them. I know sometimes it takes a little bit to actually get them in the question box to actually get them all typed out before somebody says, okay, I guess we're done. So I'm trying to fill in the blanks a little bit here and give people the time to type in their questions if they have any. There's lots of different ways that you guys can do columns and get things to set up to make things dynamic. So based on report dates, you can actually make the columns do all kinds of fun stuff in terms of quarters, in, like we were talking about with the Adams question with the forecasted year to date and being able to show a 12-month where it showed you partial actual and partial budget. If anybody's interested in seeing a demo or a webinar that we talk about, hey, all the cool things that you can do with columns and just the other things that maybe I've done set up for other clients, drop us a note here and let us know that you'd be interested in it, and we'll, we can maybe set that up for another presentation here coming up. So in Report Viewer, the header wraps when exported to Excel. Is there a way to not have this wrap? Are you talking specifically the report header? I'm not sure which header you're saying is wrapping. I'd be careful about using auto text. The title of the report is wrapping. It must have a really long title. I'm not sure that I've ever seen one wrap, because usually if it's in the middle, maybe if you're are you putting it on the side or are you putting it in the middle? It's left justified, okay. I'm not sure. I don't know that there is a way to not make it wrap, because yeah, I would try moving it to the middle and see if that helps, because it might give it a little bit more space, because I think it only gets so far when you can do left or right. Try moving it to the middle and see if that helps. If not, send me an email and we can play with it and see if we can get that to do what you need it to do. All right, does anybody else have any questions? I'm happy to answer them. I don't want to cut anybody off if they're trying to think of something, but I also don't want to make people hang out and wait if there's not a whole lot of questions coming in. Give it a couple more minutes here and we'll see if anybody comes in. Last stretch and see if they frantically trying to type in questions. Hopefully you guys found this helpful. All right, I think Alexis, I think we're probably good.
All right, we can go ahead and wrap it up. Thanks again, Annette, for such an awesome job presenting. And again, if you'd like to reach out, you can reply to our follow-up email, or you can contact us at us-marketing@columbusglobal.com. And Annette, I believe your email is abr@columbusglobal.com. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All righty. Well, thanks so much for attending, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye, everyone.